and she thought I was talented, Mama, and she gave me a part in this play.
Carol Burnett made millions of people laugh for more than 10 years. But one night in 1977, something happened that changed everything. She performed a sketch that was supposed to be funny, but instead it made everyone in the studio completely silent. The cameras kept rolling, but nobody laughed. Some of the crew members even started crying. Carol, who had become famous for bringing joy to people's faces, never watched that episode again. For 47 years, she has avoided seeing it. It wasn't because the sketch was bad. Critics said it was one of the most powerful things ever shown on television. Fans were amazed by it. The show even won awards because of it. But Carol couldn't stand to watch herself in it. She said it was too real, too painful. What happened in that sketch that haunted America's funniest woman for the rest of her life? Why did she walk away from it forever? To understand that night, we need to go back to the beginning of Carol's life. Before she became the queen of comedy, she was just a little girl that nobody seemed to want. She was born in 1933 in San Antonio, Texas, into a home that was already broken. Both of her parents had serious drinking problems. They had given up on their dreams and were drowning their disappointment in alcohol and bitterness. Her father worked as a theater manager. He had a nice smile and seemed charming, but he couldn't keep a steady job. He drifted from one workplace to another, never finding his place in the world. Her mother had once wanted to be a writer, but she had become cold and distant over the years. The drinking had consumed her, and she was emotionally unreachable. She was like a shadow in the corner of their home, barely noticing that Carol existed. By the time Carol was just a toddler, she had already learned what it felt like to be invisible. The people who were supposed to love her most had chosen the bottle over bedtime stories. Instead of warm hugs, there was only silence in their house. Some nights, little Carol would wait by the door, hoping that someone would come home sober and present, someone who would actually see her and care about her. But the footsteps she heard were rarely kind or gentle. Eventually, her parents gave up entirely on taking care of her. Carol was sent to live with her maternal grandmother, a woman named Mabel White. They lived together in a cramped boarding house in Hollywood. There was no space, no privacy, and no money to fall back on. The place was full of broken people, with peeling paint on the walls and the constant ache of being poor hanging over everything. Carol and her grandmother shared just one room. They had to stretch $20 a week to survive, and often they didn't have basic things like toilet paper, real meals, or heat during the winter months. But despite all of this hardship, something amazing happened. For the first time in her life, Carol felt safe. Mabel didn't have much money or many possessions, but she gave Carol something incredibly powerful: unconditional love. She would read to Carol, encourage her imagination, and never made her feel like she was a burden. When Carol would pretend to be on stage, acting out little performances, Mabel didn't laugh at her or tell her to stop being silly. Instead, she watched with wonder and amazement. It was in that tiny, worn-out room that Carol began to dream big dreams. She wasn't just thinking about surviving anymore. She was thinking about being seen, about turning her pain into something beautiful. Living in poverty didn't stop Carol from dreaming, but sometimes those dreams were the only thing keeping her going. To escape from all the noise, sadness, and shame around her, Carol invented an imaginary twin sister named Karen. Karen was confident and stylish. Karen was everything that Carol wished she could be. Carol made Karen so real in her mind that even the other broken, weary people living in their boarding house believed that Karen actually existed. Carol would climb up the fire escape of their building, change her clothes, fix her hair differently, and then reappear as Karen. Then, a few moments later, she would return as Carol, quieter and more cautious. This wasn't just a simple game for a child. It was performance. It was therapy. And most importantly, it was survival. Carol was learning how to become different people, how to transform herself, and she didn't even realize she was developing skills that would one day make her famous. But not all of her escapes from reality were imaginary. Every Saturday, Carol and her grandmother would scrape together 25 cents, which was more than 10% of their entire weekly income, to go to the movies. For just a few hours, they weren't poor and they weren't scared. They were transported somewhere else entirely, watching movie stars kiss, dance, and conquer the world. It was in one of those dark movie theaters that Carol heard something that would completely change her life. Tarzan's yell. That sound hit her like lightning. She went home and practiced it over and over again, not knowing that she was actually building professional-level voice control just by playing around and having fun. What started as a silly childhood obsession would eventually become one of the most recognizable sounds in her live shows. Her version of the Tarzan yell would bring down entire audiences with laughter. It was her first comedy weapon, and she had no idea how important it would become. By the time Carol finished high school, she had set one clear goal for herself. She wanted to become a journalist. She thought that maybe if she could write about the world, she could understand it better, or maybe even escape from it entirely. She decided she wanted to go to UCLA, but when it came time to actually enroll, the cost hit her like a brick wall. She needed $50. That's it, just $50. In today's money, that would be around $600. It might as well have been $1 million to Carol, because she didn't have it, and nobody in her life had that kind of money either. Then something completely unexpected happened. A stranger, someone who to this day remains completely anonymous, paid her tuition. There was no note, no explanation, just enough money to open a door that had been locked tight. Carol never found out who this generous person was, but that one act of kindness didn't just get her into college. It told her for the first time in her life that maybe, just maybe, she actually mattered to someone. Carol enrolled as a journalism major, but a last-minute theater class changed everything for her. When she got on stage, she came alive in a way she never had before. She wasn't shy or poor or invisible anymore. She was funny. So incredibly funny that her professors and classmates started urging her to switch her major to theater. She took their advice, even though it was risky. But for once in her life, she wasn't just trying to survive. She was dreaming out loud and believing those dreams might actually come true. Then another miracle happened. At a party in San Diego, which she had only gone to because they had free food, she met a millionaire shipbuilder. He wasn't involved in show business at all, but somehow he believed in her. Carol told him about her dream of going to New York to chase Broadway, but explained that she couldn't afford to make that move. This generous man offered her and her boyfriend $1,000 each, but he had 3 conditions. They could never reveal his name, they had to use the money only for their move to New York, and if they ever made it big, they had to pay it forward to help someone else someday. They agreed to his terms immediately. They packed their bags, left UCLA behind, and headed east to New York City. Carol was 21 years old, and she had never even been outside of Texas before. But as she said later, "I didn't know enough to be scared." New York was nothing like anything she had ever experienced, and that's exactly what made it feel so magical and full of possibility. New York was gritty, loud, and seemed impossible to conquer, but Carol loved every minute of it. She landed a spot at the rehearsal club, which was a boarding house specifically for aspiring actresses. 5 girls shared each room, with only 1 bathroom and 1 closet between them. Nobody had any money, but everyone had hope. Carol slept on a small cot, worked as a hat check girl at night, and spent her days going to auditions. Her big break came from something that nobody took seriously, a completely ridiculous joke song about John Foster Dulles, who was the U.S. Secretary of State at the time. The song was absurd. It was written as a love ballad to the most boring man in all of Washington, but Carol sang it with such conviction and commitment that the crowd went absolutely wild. That silly song got her onto the Ed Sullivan Show, and just like that, she wasn't anonymous anymore. She kept rising in the entertainment world. She appeared on The Gary Moore Show and starred in the Broadway musical Once Upon a Mattress. Then, in 1967, something historic happened. The Carol Burnett Show premiered. The show wasn't just successful, it was groundbreaking. 30 million people tuned in every single week to watch Carol and her cast perform. She broke new ground as the first woman to lead a variety show during primetime television. Her sketches with Harvey Korman, Tim Conway, and Vicki Lawrence became legendary. The show won 25 Emmy Awards, and Carol's cast members won awards too. The show didn't just make people laugh, it changed comedy forever. But in 1977, something changed dramatically. That year, Carol performed a sketch as part of her recurring series called The Family. She played a character named Eunice, who was a woman weighed down by failure and crushed dreams. Usually, this character was played in an exaggerated way for laughs, but this particular sketch was completely different. The sketch was called The Gong Show. In it, Eunice enters a cheap, low-quality talent competition, hoping that she can sing her way out of her small, disappointing life. But instead of receiving applause and recognition, she is mocked, laughed at, and completely humiliated. One of the judges, played by real-life game show host Chuck Barris, tears her apart with cruel comments. There were no punchlines in this sketch, no funny voices or silly physical comedy, just a woman breaking down completely on stage. When the sketch ended, the stage lights dimmed, the camera slowly pulled back, and there sat Carol as Eunice, alone and sobbing. The studio audience didn't laugh at all. The crew members didn't move. They just stood there, many of them with tears in their eyes. And Carol, she never watched that episode again. She later admitted that the pain portrayed in that sketch was too close to her own real experiences. Eunice's dreams were her dreams. The disappointment and humiliation that Eunice felt, Carol had lived through that herself. The critics called the performance brilliant and groundbreaking. Viewers called it heartbreaking and powerful, but Carol called it too much to bear. While Carol was making the entire world laugh, her own personal world was actually falling apart behind the scenes. Her first marriage to actor Don Saroyan had already collapsed by the early 1960s. They had married young, both full of big dreams and hopes for the future. But grief cracked their relationship apart after Don's daughter from a previous relationship died. He spiraled into depression and alcoholism, and Carol's rising career only made the distance between them grow wider. They separated on Christmas Day in 1959, and 3 years later, they were officially divorced. Don continued to battle depression and alcoholism until the day he died in 1990. Carol didn't stay single for very long. She married TV producer Joe Hamilton, who already had 8 children from his previous marriage. Together, they had 3 more daughters, Carrie, Jody, and Erin. From the outside, it looked like the perfect television family, but behind the cameras, things were slowly unraveling. In 1976, the National Enquirer printed a vicious lie, claiming that Carol had been drunk at a restaurant with Henry Kissinger. The story hurt deeply, not just because it was completely false, but because Carol had spent her entire life dealing with the damage that alcohol could cause. She had seen what it did to her parents and her first husband, and she lived with constant fears about addiction. She decided to sue the magazine. It took 5 years of endless legal appeals, but she finally won the case. She said she didn't do it for the easy money. She did it to prove that her name and reputation meant something. But Carol's hardest fight wasn't happening in a courtroom. It was happening in her own home. Her daughter Carrie started using drugs and alcohol when she was just 13 years old. Carrie was trying to cope with the pressure of being Carol Burnett's daughter, trying to find her own identity separate from her famous mother. Carol tried everything she could think of to help. She sent Carrie to rehab center after rehab center, but nothing seemed to work. Carrie even ran away once, disappearing from a treatment center in Texas. Carol was absolutely terrified that she might lose her daughter forever. She once said, "You have to love them enough to let them hate you," referring to the tough decisions she had to make as a parent dealing with addiction. Eventually, Carrie did get clean when she was 17 years old. It took many years, but she and Carol became closer than they had ever been before. They started acting together, writing together, and they even developed a play called Hollywood Arms that was based on Carol's difficult childhood. It felt like they were getting a second chance at their relationship. But then, tragedy struck again. In 2002, Carrie died from pneumonia that was caused by lung cancer. She was only 38 years old. Carol was completely shattered by this loss, but she did something remarkable. She finished their play anyway. "I owed it to Carrie," she said. Unfortunately, the pain didn't end there for Carol. In 2020, her youngest daughter Erin was deep in her own battle with addiction, a 19-year nightmare that spiraled into a full psychiatric crisis. When Erin could no longer take care of her own son, Carol and her current husband Brian stepped in to help. At 87 years old, Carol filed for legal guardianship of her grandson. She had spent a lifetime trying to protect the people she loved, even when it cost her everything emotionally and financially. But even after losing her daughter, going through multiple divorces, and nearly losing herself in the process, Carol Burnett never stopped performing. In her late 80s, she delivered a scene so powerful and chilling that it stunned an entirely new generation of viewers. At an age when most stars fade into quiet retirement, Carol delivered one of the most unforgettable performances in modern television. She was 89 years old when she appeared in the final season of Better Call Saul, playing a character named Marion. Marion was an unassuming grandmother who slowly begins to suspect that her new friend, Gene, is actually hiding something very dangerous about his past. The tension in the scene builds slowly and naturally. There's no dramatic music, no fast camera cuts, just Carol sitting at her kitchen table, realizing the truth about who this man really is. Then she delivers a simple line, "I trusted you." Those 3 words landed like a physical punch to viewers. For a terrifying moment in the scene, Saul considers whether he might need to silence her forever to protect his secret. The show's creators later admitted that writing that scene felt wrong to them. You simply don't threaten Carol Burnett, America's sweetheart. But her quiet strength and dignity made the scene work perfectly. When she calmly pressed her life alert button and turned him into the police, critics called it one of the most powerful moments in the entire series. Not bad for someone who had once pretended to be her own twin sister in a run-down boarding house. And Carol wasn't finished yet. In 2024, at the remarkable age of 91, she starred in a new show called Palm Royale. She played a wealthy woman who spends most of the show lying in a coma. But then, her character wakes up and starts babbling in what sounds like complete gibberish. The amazing part is that Carol improvised. Did all of that dialogue herself, making it up as she went along, and it worked perfectly. Her performance was so good that she was nominated for Outstanding Supporting Actress in a Comedy Series, making her the oldest female nominee in Emmy history. After 7 decades in show business, she was still breaking records, still reinventing herself, and still completely unforgettable. But no matter how many awards Carol wins or how many scenes she steals in new shows, there's still one performance that she will never watch again. There's one moment that remains too painful for her to revisit, and it came from a sketch that she wrote herself. Carol Burnett made America laugh for 11 straight seasons on her variety show. She brought joy and laughter into millions of homes every week. But there's one episode from 1977 that she refuses to watch. It aired once, 47 years ago. There were no jokes, no big laughs, no silly costumes, just a heartbreaking sketch about a woman who was desperate to be seen and who gets completely crushed by rejection. The crew cried while filming it. The studio audience sat in complete silence. Carol said later that it was too real for her to handle, because that pain wasn't acting. It was actually her own life, her own experiences, her own deepest fears played out on national television. She has never watched it again, not even once in all these decades. So here's the question that Carol's story leaves us with. If your deepest pain, your most vulnerable moment, was caught on camera and broadcast to the world, would you be able to watch it? Carol Burnett, one of the strongest and funniest women in entertainment history, found that there was one performance, one moment of truth, that was simply too real, too painful, and too close to home for her to ever face again.